Module 18, vCenter Permissions. In this section, we want to understand vCenter permissions, take a look at vCenter roles, review permissions assignment, and then talk about some practical application. How can we use this? All right, like many infrastructure-related tools in our industry, Active Directory, NDS, and file systems, vCenter gives us the ability to assign permissions and control access to portions of our virtual infrastructure. We can assign permissions to just about any object in the infrastructure that appears in the hierarchy on the left side of the screen, and all we need to do is to click on the object itself. In this case, we've got an ESX server highlighted, and go over the Permissions tab at the right of the screen. Now, permissions assignment in vCenter works very similar to other things in the industry, and the best practices that are followed are similar as well, as you'll see. But there is one unique part about this. vCenter does not have any of its own accounts. It maintains no accounts of its own. So most things in the industry, for example, if you're doing file permissions in Windows, Windows has the accounts, you go into the files or folders and you simply take the accounts and give them permissions. But here we don't have accounts. So vCenter uses Active Directory accounts if the vCenter box is installed in the domain. By default, the domain admins group is added to the administrator's role for vCenter, and if the vCenter box is not a member of a domain, then the local administrators group is assigned the administrator's role. That's the only default assignment made, is to give administrators of the vCenter box, whether it be domain or workgroup based, administrative control to the virtual infrastructure. So in vCenter, as I mentioned, it does not maintain its own accounts, but it does maintain what's called roles. And roles are predefined or canned sets of permissions. For example, the administrator's role in vCenter gives unlimited access to everything in the virtual infrastructure by default. There's also a read-only role, which, as you might add, will only give read-only access to certain objects in the inventory. And so when we're assigning vCenter permissions, we have to either use an existing predefined role or create a new custom role which contains the permissions we wish to provide to the object or objects of our choice. Then we go in and we add the Windows domain or workgroup account into the vCenter role, which has the permissions we wish to convey to the objects. So for a couple of examples, imagine we have 3 ESX server admins, and we want to give them unlimited access to all the objects within the vCenter database. So we create a Windows domain group called ESX admins, and we add those user accounts into that group. Next, we go into vCenter, we click the data center object. The permissions in vCenter, like many other tools and applications in the industry, flow down to the objects under them. This is sometimes referred to as inheritance. So in vCenter, we click the data center object, the top level object, click the Permissions tab, and assign the ESX admins group to the predefined role of administrator. Because the permissions flow down or are inherited through the infrastructure, this one assignment provides those 3 admins with all the capabilities they need. Another example, let's say we have 4 help desk personnel and we want to give limited administrative capability to the vCenter infrastructure. So once again, we're going to create a Windows domain group called ESX Help Desk, and we'll add their user accounts to that group in Active Directory. Next, we create a custom role in vCenter called ESX Help Desk, and we grant that role permissions we wish to assign to the objects to which we're attempting to provide access. Now we assign the Active Directory group ESX Help Desk to the ESX Help Desk role in vCenter. So we discovered that to find the permissions of an object, we simply click on the object and go to the Permissions tab, but where are the roles? Well, to find roles, we go under the View menu in vCenter, go to the Administration area, and then select Roles. You can also navigate down from the home screen and go to Administration and Roles from there as well. And the permissions, of course, are found in the Permissions tab of the objects in vCenter. So vCenter permissions can be assigned to many objects, just about all of them really, in the vCenter inventory. Data centers, folders, clusters, resource pool, VMs, and others can all receive permissions assignments. Permissions assignments do trickle down or are inherited by objects at lower levels. So in this example, if we give a read-only permission to the lab data center, that permission will be inherited by the ESX servers and by the virtual machine down below that. We can override this permissions inheritance simply by turning it off in the assignment window, or by making a later explicit assignment. So if I give an administrator a read-only permission to the lab data center, but then in the folder below that, I give that user a later explicit assignment and assign no access, well, the most recent assignment applies and flows down from there, and that administrator would not have access from that folder down. Now, VMware provides several roles in vCenter. The roles are predefined or canned sets of permissions. And it's easy to simply click on the role and view the permissions assigned to that role to see if what it does will meet your needs. If not, simply create your own. To create your own role, you can either clone off of an existing one, or you can make a completely new one from scratch. So if we right-click on the virtual machine power user role, as you see here on the screen, if I hit clone role, then what it will do is it will take all of the base permissions assigned to that role, generate a new role for me to which I assign a name, and then I can begin to build and modify permissions off of that one. And that can be a useful shortcut if you just want to add or delete a few things. On the other hand, if I select add role, this will give me the option to create a completely new role. I'll simply type in a name and then go in and assign the permissions from scratch without it being based first off of another existing role. Okay, so as you look at permissions assignment, first determine which default role provides the permissions you would like to provide to an object, if any. And oftentimes you'll find the predefined roles will meet many of your needs. However, if none exist, then you'll need to go in and create a custom role. Once this is done, highlight an object in the inventory which you wish to provide access. In the example below, we've used the data center, and click the Permissions tab. Once you're in the Permissions area, you'll notice there is no button to add a new permission. And this is unique. Usually when you go into these different portions of Virtualization, there's an add or a new button somewhere. There's not one here. So always in Virtualization, whenever in doubt, right-click. And if you right-click anywhere in the white area, you'll notice that a menu pops up, and right at the very top, as you can see on this screenshot, there's an Add Permission item there. So once we go to Add Permissions, the screen that you see here pops up. And a couple things to note. So at the bottom of the screen there, we can press the Add button, and we can browse through and grab user accounts and groups and assign them permissions to this object. But note that the permissions tree over to the right side of the screen is all grayed out. That can't be modified. It can only be viewed for the selected role. So right now the read-only role is what's in the selection box, and we can simply scroll through and view that access. So we can add a user or group to this particular role, but we can't actually modify the permissions from here. Now, this is a little unique if you're used to doing things in other types of systems. You know, once again, within Windows, it has its own accounts, and so we simply take the accounts, add them to objects, and then click and modify permissions. In vCenter, it works a little differently. We have to first go in and define the role and permissions to that role that we wish to convey, and then come here and simply add the user accounts and groups to the available roles. And notice at the bottom of the screen, we have the Propagate to Child Objects checkbox there. By default, permissions do flow down. They are inherited to objects lower in the inventory, but you can uncheck that optionally and prevent that inheritance.